The situation facing rural pubs, because the Vintners Federation of Ireland is warning that rural pubs are facing what it calls an existential threat as rising energy, wage, insurance and operating costs continue to bite. More than 2,200 pubs have closed nationwide since 2005, and the VFI is now calling on the government to introduce targeted supports, including a proposed 40% excise rebate on draft products ahead of Budget 2027. Joining us now to discuss the challenges facing the sector and what the future holds for Ireland's pubs are the Clare VFI Chair and Publican Charlie O'Mara and the Vice Chair Clare Tourism and from Moroney's Bar in Ennis, Maurice Walsh. And you're both very welcome to the show. Charlie, VFI saying rural pubs facing an existential threat. Just how serious is the situation right now on the ground?
Good morning, Alan. Look, it's we've seen it for the last number of years. It's not improving. Rural Ireland, if you even travel around our own county, you can see how many pubs have gone in every village. Look at the sustainability of a pub is getting tougher and tougher, especially for the rural pubs. Not that the town would be massively better, but for rural pubs that are trying to survive on a weekend trade, it's very hard to keep a business viable. And with rising costs from everything from your ESB, your insurance, the cost of doing business generally is gone up through the roof. And then we have our suppliers who aren't helping the situation either, like the Edge and Heineken, are constantly bringing a new increase. And it's just not sustainable for an awful lot of pubs anymore. And unfortunately, like they were the hub, they're the last bastion of Irish society, especially in Northern Ireland, the last real social connection for people. And if something doesn't happen soon, I'm afraid we'll end up in, and it's only a short term, we're not talking long term, that you'll have very, maybe no pubs at all in some villages.
Yeah, Maurice, what's your perspective on it, and particularly the costs? I mentioned a number of different areas. Electricity costs reportedly up 70% in 5 years, wages up 40%, other costs climbing as well. You know, which increase is hurting pubs the most, or is it just a cumulative factor?
Good morning, Alan. Thanks for having me on there. Yeah, it is more or less an accumulative factor. And every line on your business sheet shows an increase in relation to costs. You know, energy costs has increased by 70% over the last few years, but in the last 3 months alone, it's gone up 25% due to the war in Iran. Oil costs, everyone was talking about oil costs in the Strait of Hormuz. Oil costs in relation to home heating oil, which is again gone up 100%. Water rates have gone up 50%. Rates in the town of Ennis has jumped by 60%. And on top of that, as Charlie has mentioned in relation to suppliers increase their prices because of the increase that they feel necessary to do their business, you know, and unfortunately publicans then would have to reflect that in relation to an increase in price. The proposal is based in relation to alleviating those costs rather than VAT implication. It's really in relation to relieving those costs that I just outlined. So it's badly needed if we can get it over the line. It's a very good proposal. It's targeted. It doesn't bring in off licenses. It doesn't bring in supermarkets. So it is targeted to the local publican. It is targeted to rural Ireland. And everybody knows that in rural Ireland, tourism is a huge factor, especially in our county here in Clare. And the local pub is part of that. People come to Ireland, they want to visit the sites and the attractions that we have, but they want to relax in an evening and go to the local pub where they may be accommodated or they may be with the music. And that's what's the backbone of Ireland is, and we need to maintain that.
Yeah, and Charlie, the Irish pubs, are they still a huge attraction for tourists? Are foreign visitors here surprised when they hear how many pubs are closing?
Yeah, look at as Morris said there, you know, the Lonely Planet did a survey there a number of years ago, and the number one reason for people coming to Ireland was to visit an Irish pub, to soak up the atmosphere in an Irish pub. Like, it's, I suppose, people have tried to recreate what an Irish pub is the world over and spend millions on it. And then these people, as you said, they're coming into our country and they're, maybe staying in some part of rural Ireland, and they realise that, the pot they're coming for is no longer here. And a lot of the pubs that maybe, especially early in the week, they mightn't even be open. So, yeah, it's always been a huge factor. The Irish pub for the trad music, your food, and just to enjoy the banter and fun inside the pub. But like as you say, if you're inviting people in and they're no longer here, and like that, Americans, I had a few Americans in there last Wednesday night with me, and they couldn't believe since the last time they stayed in the all round how many pubs had gone in the meantime. So yeah, it's a worrying sign, and there's no point in inviting people into your country and there's nothing here for them to do or nowhere to go at night. You come to socialise, you come to see the people and meet people. And if these places are gone, why are we bringing people in? Why? And it's a massive industry. We're employing, the hospitality sector is employing a huge number of people. But, every year another pub or two disappears. And as I said, rural Ireland especially is really getting hammered in this.
Yeah, I suppose, Maurice, maybe it's understandable that foreign visitors are surprised at the number of pubs closing, but is the issue us Irish here? I mean, we're probably not surprised at the number of pubs closing because perhaps it is the domestic customer whose habits are changing permanently. People appear to be drinking less or socialising differently than they did before the pandemic, and is that just a direction of travel that unfortunately it's quite difficult to reverse at this stage?
Yes, you're right in relation to that, Alan. I think the pandemic did create a void in relation to people's needs, and a lot of people, maybe consumed alcohol at home through the pandemic and that. But pubs are resilient, and if you stand still in the pub business, you'll always fail. So, creativity and things like that in relation to pubs is ongoing. I think we need to have a situation that people are comfortable going out and know that they can get home. And the taxi situation doesn't help that, especially in relation to rural Ireland, and that's been highlighted before. And we need to address that because it's easy to get out at 8 or 9 o'clock, but it's very hard to get home at 11 or half 11, And that is a big crux in relation to rural Ireland, in relation to the pub trade at the moment,
Yeah, Charlie, would you share Maurice's view on the difficulties of getting public transport and particularly taxis, especially in rural settings? But are there other issues feeding into the problem as well? You mentioned suppliers not helping earlier on too. Is it a mixture of all of that?
Look, it's a perfect storm. I know I spoke with you before in regards to the issues with taxis now. And look, it's not even in rural Ireland. We see it in the town of Ennis, and the busy nights is near impossible. But you can understand why. If we're quiet, the taxis are quiet, so there's no one getting into the industry. So it's a tough one to deal with. And then if you're out in rural Ireland, it's even tougher because there's no one going to make a living on 2 nights a week. So there's nobody new coming into the industry. Now we've had a lot of different initiatives there over the last number of years. Some of them worked to a certain point, but the overall impression I got when especially down in West Cork and Kerry there, they started their own scheme, but they found that it was very hard to operate it in the sense that they were kind of running the car at certain hours, but people are coming out at different times, wanting to go home at different times, and they found it hard going. Now their VFI are working on trying to bring up a new scheme with the minister, but it's always a very hard one to get off the ground and get people to work. And as I say, it's not viable to, if you're ringing a fella and saying, I have 2 nights work, you have Friday and Saturday night, the rest of the week we don't have anything for you, people are not going to run to get into industry. And as you say, look at social habits have changed big time. I suppose, look at the cost. People are looking and saying, what nights can I afford to go out now? And over the last number of years, costs just kept rising, and unfortunately, look at every industry is no more than ourselves are struggling to keep on top of things. But I suppose the one point we'd be kind of pushing really is that, our tourist industry is huge here in this country, and if we lose what's left of our pubs, why are we inviting people in if there's nothing here for them?
Maurice, do you share Charlie's view that suppliers could be doing a bit more to help? He said some of them seem to be regularly putting their prices up?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. You know, when you look at the balance sheet of the Agio and the bigger companies, and you say that they're making profit and good profit, but we all have expenses, and our suppliers have expenses, so we'd have to row in with them in relation to their increases. And the last increases that the suppliers have put up basically has been taken on the chin by the industry, where we followed in relation to what they put up, but we haven't increased it to hold the margin. The margin in relation to pubs at the moment is running between 5 and 7%. And 60 cents in every euro that comes in goes back to government, which is crippling. When directly or indirectly, that's what returns to government over 60 cents in every euro. So the government have a lot to answer in relation to that, and this particular relief would, in some way, facilitate the ongoing increased costs that are out there at the moment, which we outlined earlier. And it will be welcomed, and it is a little bit of a no-brainer because it doesn't bring in the multinationals into the market in relation to this particular relief, and it would be something. Obviously, you have to sell the kegs, so because it's based on draught, and you have to sell the kegs to facilitate in relation to the grant or to the subsidy. So. And it's really targeted to rural Ireland. And if you sell 5 kegs in rural Ireland, and you're getting €100, nobody's going to argue in relation to that. And if you're selling tin kegs, you're getting €200. It doesn't sound like a big subsidy, but at the moment, that €100 or €200 is a breaking point for an awful lot of people.
Yeah, Charlie, this 40% excise rebate on draft products that the VFI is calling for, why do you believe it's the right solution rather than a broader VAT reduction? Is it for the reasons that Charlie is out, or that Morris has outlined?
Yeah, well, number one, it's targeted. The VAT we fought for years, that eventually is coming in, but for an awful lot of pubs that don't do food, the VAT reduction means absolutely nothing. The other side, as Maurice was saying, that this is targeted, so you haven't had big multinationals coming in making a killing on the back of it. So it's literally just going to go down. It'll be capped up to 20,000 a year. So if you have a pub out in rural Ireland, as Maurice says, you're selling 3 or 4 kegs a week, that could be the tipping point for you. That will go towards paying, whatever costs, be ESB, energy or whatever. But it's like bringing in, someone came back and said to us, would you not look for some other method? But we feel that this one will actually directly go back into the coffers for the local pub, which makes their business more sustainable, and going forward, at least they can target something. They're saying, right, okay, there's a reason for us to keep going. It'll actually be easy enough for the government and the taxman to manage, because it'll go on your previous year's figures. And as I said, it's capped at 20,000. But, you can bring in different schemes and give people money and say, right, that'll keep you going for the next 6 months. But there's no business can run on, getting a one-off payment of whatever, a couple of thousand. You can't plan your business going forward on that. At least with this, they know every week that, okay, if I sell X amount of kegs, I'll have a few bob left, and you can use it against your tax bill or reduce your VAT at the end of the month, all that. So, it's something that you can plan going forward rather than a one-off payment that just disappears into whatever you need for at the time, and there's nothing there for the rest of the year. So I think, look, it's not a huge cost to the Exchequer. I think it was costed out about 75 million. It's easy enough one to actually operate. So I don't see why the government would know. We've had a very favourable response so far to it. And I don't see why the government would back down on this one.
But given, Maurice, the number of areas in which costs have gone up for pubs, as we mentioned earlier on, significant increases in electricity costs, wages, other costs as well, insurance costs, operating costs, is that 40% excise rebate really going to make any significant difference at all, make a real difference to pub business over the course of a year?
Well, it will, Alan. Like, everybody in the country is suffering at the moment in relation to costs in their own domestic situations and that. And I think they can understand in relation to the local publican or the local pub in their area experience the same cost as they're experiencing, so any relief that's given by government is obviously a plus, and this particular relief is targeted. It's targeted that will suit the publican in the local area, and it just makes that business that little bit more viable to stay open. That's really what we're looking for.
Charlie, critics will say, pubs looking for another subsidy, and indeed Morning Focus listener Dave has texted us on 086 1800 964 wondering, are any of the reductions in costs that the pubs are looking for going to be passed on? It's also very expensive to go out.
No, look, there's no point in beating behind the bush about this one. It's literally it's an incentive to try and keep what pubs are there open. I'll guarantee you that before the end of this year, you'll see another rise in costs from suppliers, because they're going to push what's going on in the Middle East at the moment. They're going to push that down to us as well, from the delivery charges, the whole lot. So, is
there any with the suppliers? I am sure you've the VFI and others have been banging the drum with them that you understand why they have to put their prices up, but that the impact it's having on pubs is seeing. I mean, surely they're looking at the number of pubs. Over 2,200 pubs have closed nationwide in the last 21 years. That's a significant number of pubs less where their produce can be sold. Have you tried spelling out to them that they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot a little bit here? If they keep putting the prices up, pubs keep closing, there's less and less, I guess, shop windows for them to show and sell their wares.
Oh, look, most definitely, and we've had numerous meetings with them, but I suppose, look, the one thing that we kind of forget about, the biggest one obviously in the market is Diageo. Guinness would have always been synonymous with Ireland. It was a trademark. But now when you look at Diageo, it's a worldwide product. They have they look at the Irish market and they probably say, look, it's only a drop in the ocean compared to what we're doing with all the rest of the world. And at the end of the day, they all just look at their market share and keep their shareholders happy. So they'll keep pushing it up. They don't seem to have any problem doing it. Once their share price drops, they look and say, right, where can we get a few bob again? We've met them on numerous occasions, and they're quite happy just to keep doing what they're doing, which is, to me, is total madness, as you say, in that there are fewer and fewer pubs to go to, fewer places to sell their products. But I suppose it's an evolving market now. They're looking at a lot of other things, including, I suppose, non-alcoholic drinks. That's a huge part of their market, but a lot of that will be sold in the off licenses, and people bring it home. So they'll just continually evolve to do things their own way. But as I said, it all comes down to money with them. That's their share prices, and the fella at the bottom of the ladder, they don't seem to be too worried about him one way or the other.
Yeah, no, I guess, Maurice, it's hard to get around that if a company that size have interests in so many international markets. This one here in relatively small Ireland isn't going to really overly matter to them, which I suppose leaves pubs with less solutions or less areas to look for a way out. I mean, some people would argue pubs maybe need to diversify more into food and events, but is that really realistic for smaller rural pubs, given the margins are so tight? And I'm sure some pubs in rural areas have had to look at cutting back on staff, have had to maybe look back on cutting back on opening hours, or even opening on certain days. Talk of having to diversify into food and events, I'm sure, is just a pipe dream.
Yeah, I mean, certain areas or certain villages have decided that certain publicans will open on different days, and they'll close on certain days, but they'll maintain a service within the village or within that particular area. And switching into food, there is a serious cost in relation to switching into food, with staff and chefs and regulations really in relation to the HSE and that, So those steps can be a little bit too far for certain publicans in certain areas where they know that they may have a trade for a couple of months over the summer season and that. But in general, most rural pubs want to be open. They want to see people coming in. They want to be a place of contact for locals. They want to be an experience for tourists coming into the country. And they're prepared to do that, and a lot of publicans will have a second job or a daytime job and open their pub at night and to facilitate that. I think it's more of a draw than it is in relation to a money earning at the moment. And the relief that's been looked for is justifiable and it's targeted.
Just to finish with you, Charlie, you mentioned earlier on that you feel in the grand scheme of things and the grand scheme of asks that various sectors have of the government, that 75 million is not much to ask for, particularly when you both clearly feel it would help pubs, and you've both outlined how important it is in terms of our tourism offering. And while a massive global supplier might not be too receptive to that argument when you're going to them asking them to stop increasing costs, the government, I would imagine you'd be optimistic they'll be more cognizant of that argument. Ireland's tourism offering is important to us as a country and to them. Do you think you will see that 40% excise rebate come in the budget, or any other supports?
No, look, I'd be very confident on this one, as I said, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's not a huge ask from the government. Number two, our whole hospitality industry is worth so much to the country. And as I said, we have to look down the road and say, in a couple of years' time, if there are no pubs in rural Ireland, where do you go then? We're still targeting, especially the American market, big time. And these people are coming in asking us, where they're gone. So it's not asking a massive amount of the government to do what they're doing. It'll be easy enough to actually manage what it is. And at the end of the day, if it only kept a rural pub in every village in Ireland open, wouldn't it make a massive difference to the amount of workers that are working in the industry, all that. So the government has to look at it in the bigger picture and say, right, every time a pub closes up, that's lack of employment for, especially when most young ones started out, it was in their local pub learning how to pull a pint, and that's so you have to look at the bigger picture and say, okay, in the short term it's going to cost us a few bob, but in the long term, if we can hold on to what we have and try and keep the businesses that are there still viable, I think is well worth it, and we'll start lobbying we're already lobbying the TDs and ministers on it. And as I said, it has been favourable, the response, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be. It's not a huge ask. Okay, we will leave it there, but I've no doubt we'll be speaking to you again in the not too distant future. My thanks to the Clare VFI Chair and Ennis Publican Charlie O'Mara, and Vice Chair Clare Tourism, and also from Moroney's Bar in Ennis, Maurice Walsh.